In the year 2000, the once independent New Line Cinema, now owned by Warner Brothers, made expensive art movies for mainstream audiences. While the studio was a year away from the unveiling of their game-changing Lord of the Rings trilogy, they had a stack of creative wildcards alongside their more mainstream fare. Their run of noteworthy, highly personal films proved impressive, including David Fincher's Seven, Alex Proyas's Dark City, Gary Ross's Pleasantville, and Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia, just to name a few. Among the most surprising and bizarre of these late 20th century pictures from the studio is Tarsem's The Cell, a serial killer thriller with a novel sci-fi twist, a dash of fairy tale horror, and a look both highly theatrical and baroque. Much like The Silence of the Lambs, which this film often got compared to at the time, The Cell has a plot with a built-in timer. A young girl has been kidnapped by a serial killer with a very specific and horrible mythology. The killer, Carl Rudolph Stargher, played by Vincent D'Onofrio, is the only one who knows where she is. An FBI agent, Peter Novak, played by Vaughn, must get the location before her time runs out.
You're the bad man, aren't you, Carl?
Twist? Stargher fell into a coma before being apprehended and is uncommunicative to any normal means of interrogation. So a radical attempt must be made by sending Dr. Catherine Deane, played by Jennifer Lopez, a child psychiatrist, literally into the mind of a serial killer. And that really does mean literally. In a science fiction twist on the genre, Deane is part of an experimental program that connects human brains together on a level of thought, immersing her in the psyche of people too physically or mentally damaged to communicate.
Not only maps the mind, it sends the signal to another party. All you need to do is tune in.
Opening with a truly stunning scene that very powerfully sets the tone for the rest of the film, we see a desert landscape with a strong emphasis on color, especially the golden sand and the clear blue, almost painted like sky. Catherine is there, all dressed in perfect white, trying to help an unfortunate child under her care. On horseback, Catherine gets off the horse and heads up a sand dune. Pan back to the horse and has become a perfect black statue. Strange, otherworldly music is playing that is enough to put even the hardest horror fan on edge with its loud slap-in-the-face sound. And soon, Catherine finds her subject, Edward, hiding from his own personal demons, a child struggling with life and reality. He doesn't want Catherine's help right now, and after a brief chat, Catherine turns to him, only for his face to turn demonic, ugly, and actually rather frightening.
Edward.
The Cell resembles a music video or perfume ad, and at first glance, you may assume that's because the guy in charge worked as a commercial director.
Maybe they're friendly.
And as a music video director. You can see the similarities between these videos and this movie, but unlike David Fincher's Alien 3 or Hype Williams' Belly,
I don't like that shit.
this flick has a reason to look stylized or arty. It isn't because this short-form director has trouble transcending the feature-length Hollywood. The premise of The Cell poses the question, what would the mind of a serial killer look like? And the director answered, like this. Serial killers have been a part of the horror and thriller genre since the birth of motion pictures. They're repulsive and terrifying, but strangely fascinating, and at times incredibly captivating characters. From mass slashers to the sophistication and charm of Hannibal, they are perfect creatures to build movies around. The Cell attempted to take viewers closer to a serial killer than ever before by actually entering his mind and giving it form and structure. The inside of this killer's mind is a dark and twisted kingdom, which he rules over as a demonic tyrant. Much of the storyline splits into parallel after Catherine enters the mind of the killer, flipping between Peter's frantic race to find the victim in the real world, with Catherine trying to survive the hellish horrors of the psychopath's psyche. Obviously, the more interesting scenes are the latter.
Where do you come from?
The plot is mostly irrelevant, more a delivery device for insane visuals, and acting as a tether for a roller coaster ride of nightmarish imagery. We're rattled before we get a glimpse of the serial killer's mind, but once Catherine jacks in, so to speak, all bets are off.
My boy, my little one.
Borrowing from artists like Damien Hirst, Odd Neirdrum, and H.R. Geiger, the production design is the film's most striking element by far. Past mind-bending thrillers only flirted with surrealism, but The Cell feels like cinema's first true realization of the vast recesses of the mind. German expressive cinema may have plumbed psychology via art design. Louis Buñuel and Jean Cocteau certainly made absurdism into poetry. David Lynch captured the mundane Odd Neirdrum terror of waking nightmares via Twin Peaks. And Peter Greenaway definitely turned formalism into high art. But for sheer big-budget gonzo surrealism, can The Cell really be topped? While the director portrays the real world through restrained cinematography, all cold lighting, and minimal camera movement, the complete opposite is true of the mind Catherine enters. Instantly, the visuals become different in every way, perfectly portraying the concept of entering an entirely new perception. Colors are more heavily saturated, both dark and brighter. The camera moves in unexpected directions, seemingly working on different laws of physics and reaction. And most fascinatingly and queasily, the world inside Stargher's is a gothic mashup of memory and fantasy. Drawn mostly on BDSM, fetishism, and Catholic imagery, a viewer is brought unflinchingly through images of his victims as both idealized, beautiful versions of themselves and horribly distorted, sexualized stereotypes. Almost as disturbing as his own self-perception. Within himself, Stargher is separated into different linked psyches, as a small child, as a self-aware adult, and as a powerful monster king.
Did you break that plate?
I broke the plate.
Did you break that plate?
I broke the plate.
Just keep playing plate. Hey, let's break them all.
Perhaps the most challenging element of The Cell, and one that might still put viewers off today, is that in providing a visual narrative of Stargher's harrowing upbringing, the film asks viewers to empathize with a twisted serial killer. The implication is that although Stargher is in fact evil, the person responsible for cultivating that evil into existence is Stargher's abusive father. Clearly, Stargher the child was innocent, acutely compassionate even, as evidenced in a scene where, in a desperate act of mercy, he drowns an injured bird, presumably to prevent his father from being able to harm it.
It was better for the bird. I saved him.
Catherine attempts to appeal to the young version of Stargher for help, but in a heartbreaking reminder of the cycle of violence, the child seems to be just as frightened of his adult self as he is of his father.
He found me. He always finds me.
Stargher the Demon King, with flowing robes, enveloping an impossibly muscled body, reigns supreme in this world. After all, as long as he retains his form, no one will ever harm Carl Stargher again. The Cell is an idiosyncratic take on the psychological thriller genre, immersed in its own incredible visual style. And then, something horrible happened. It became a blockbuster hit film with Jennifer Lopez. Now, that may not sound like the worst thing in the world, but imagine making one of the most visually innovative films in years, then having it relegated to being, oh, you mean that serial killer movie with J.Lo? Such has been the fate of The Cell.
Starring in a new scary movie, The Cell. I saw this, Kevin. You were busy or something.
I missed that
Boy,
one,
this is,
It's bad, huh?
don't bring the kids. It's a scary one.
All
It's a
right.
scary one. It opens today. Please welcome Jennifer Lopez.
Though her first music album was released a year prior, 2000 was Lopez's last good year as just a movie star. By 2001, the success of The Wedding Planner started pushing her to the rom-com slums, and her tabloid exploits reduced her, quote, seriousness as an actress. It's unfortunate because her megawatt star charisma and Selena and Out of Sight promised a firebrand to be reckoned with in the new millennium.
Wanted to tussle. We tussled.
The Cell was the kind of strange genre risk that a multi-hyphenate just couldn't keep making. Like many genre films, negative opinion has tampered a bit over time. Today, The Cell holds up as one impressive debut feature, thanks to insane production and costume design, a powerhouse performance by Vincent D'Onofrio, and a breathtaking peek into a tortured mind. Also worth noting is that this tortured mind is a reminder that Hollywood was really pushing for nastiness in the 90s. This is a killer that suspends himself by hooks in his back, then rubs one out over the dead bodies of his victims. Thanks in large part to Seven and Wes Craven's Scream, Viscera was chic again. The Christploitation films at the turn and dawn of the century are evidence of this fact. What these trends exhibit is the fear of the coming millennium. Not just technology, but of humans reverting back to their most primitive, selfish selves.
For 1,000 years, we prepared ourselves for this. We're not afraid to die. Good. Because I'm not afraid to kill you.
Everything felt apocalyptic, and we wanted to escape our world for something cooler, or at least more thrilling. It's strange to think that 20 years ago, Tinseltown was willing to provide violent offerings to pacify our Y2K fears.
Almost everyone is preparing for the worst. Potential Y2K computer crashes top the list. In Jersey City, 400 bankers will be ready to take calls from investors.
They know they got to be working, and they know that's the priority.
And in other cities across the country, tens of thousands of police officers on high alert.
On New Year's Eve, the general workload for patrol officers working during that shift will probably be pretty high with the radio calls with the loud party responses and that sort of thing.
In point of fact, thanks to everybody being knees deep in Y2K paranoia, the turn of the century indeed also saw a glut of reality-bending sci-fi movies, focusing on the fear of technology and how it could change our perception of the world as we know it.
You've been living in a dream world, Neo. This is the world as it exists today.
The Matrix is obviously the most famous. Its cyberpunk version of an alternate true reality leading to 20 plus years of think pieces. Dark City came out the year prior, an impressionist examination of what is human in the face of alienness. David Cronenberg's Existence blurred reality with the video game world, its characters as players fighting for agency.
You have to play the game to find out why you're playing the game.
And of course, we had the movie we're discussing today.
The Cell kept me on the edge of my chair 3 different ways. First of all, as a science fiction adventure. Secondly, as a police thriller. And third, as this psychological drama that takes us inside the mind of this twisted killer and shows us the amazing landscape there. I think this is one of the year's best films, and Jennifer Lopez does a great job of staying calm at the center of the maelstrom. I give it 4 stars, and I'm Roger Ebert, ABC 7 News.
In spite of its financial success and stamps of approval from such respected critics as Roger Ebert and Peter Travers, The Cell never quite secured a spot among the vast collection of modern films that are considered great. Among fans of the multiple genres it straddles, The Cell is somewhat alienating, too strange for those seeking a classic thriller, and featuring science that is too vague and implausible for fans of sci-fi. Horror fans might have objected to the pop star casting, although Lopez is more than capable in this particular role. Nevertheless, there were those who loved it and who now regard it as one of the most underrated films of its time.
Do you believe there's a part of yourself that you don't show anybody?
I think everybody has that side of themselves.
Today, some of the film's shock seems left over from the bin of edgy 90s visual art. Creepy doll heads, medieval torture, gender-bending models, but much has endured. The billowing, endless cape of a demon god king, a horse being dissected in real time. A 180-degree overhead shot of a baptism from one end of a lake to the other. The Cell still lingers like a great nightmare, one that shivers you awake then fades into the real world, but leaves just enough residual imagery to tingle your spine every once and again. Once again, thanks for watching, and don't forget to share your thoughts in the comment section below.